This is Solve It for Kids.
Hello, my amazing and curious friends. My name is Jennifer, the Dean of all things STEM and STEAM, and this is Solve It for Kids, the podcast that gives kids and families a peek inside the real world of scientists, engineers, and experts as they solve problems in their jobs using creativity, cooperation, and critical thinking. And now please welcome to the show my podcast partner, Galactic Space Geek, Jeff Gagne.
Hello, Jennifer, and hello, listeners. Well, this week's Best Of episode has a word in it that doesn't get everybody excited, but I dare anybody to listen to these three clips in this Best Of and not want to learn more about it.
I completely agree. You know, I love this word and this type of career. So what are we hearing this week?
The best of thinking like an engineer.
The best of thinking like an engineer.
An
Yay!
engineer, that's right.
Absolutely. So we have clips from these three episodes. Episode 91, How Do Scientists Get Kids Excited About STEM? Dr. Jermey Matthews. Episode 77, How Do Engineers Think?
Yes.
With Dr. Cory Hixon. And episode 124, How Do You Study Another Planet's Moon? With NASA engineer Tracy Drain. That one is so amazing. So we hope you enjoy listening to all three of these episodes, and we hope you get thinking like an engineer.
How do scientists get kids excited about STEM?
How do scientists get kids excited about STEM? Oh, this is right up my alley. I can't wait to hear this. Who is our guest today, Jeff?
Our guest today, Jennifer, and you are right, he is right up your alley, is the awesome Dr. Jermey Matthews, who is a PhD in chemical engineering, a senior editor at the MIT Press, and is also co-founder of the STEM Reads Book Club.
This is so exciting. Welcome to the show, Jermey.
Thank you so much, Jennifer and Jeff and all your listeners. I'm excited to be here.
Well, we are excited to have you. So I want to dive right into this. You are a chemical engineer, and now you actually are an editor at a kids' press. How did you get there? Let's start with the whole chemical engineering thing. Why did you want to be a chemical engineer?
Ooh, well, in high school, I had this amazing opportunity. I grew up in Detroit. I'm from all over, but I grew up in Detroit, and there was a summer camp for students from Detroit, and they took us all the way up to Michigan Tech, which was a 10-hour bus ride.
Oh, wow.
And they introduced us to engineering, and I was floored. I was fascinated. I did not love chemistry in high school, but I loved the engineering part of it. I went to college, and I had to take chemistry. Then I fell in love with chemistry in college, and that's when I decided to do both, right? I wanted to do chemistry, I wanted to do engineering, and chemical engineering was what I landed on.
Okay, so what was different about your chemistry in college versus chemistry in high school
Good question.
that got you interested?
Well, maybe part of it was that my future wife was in that college chemistry course.
There you go.
I don't know if that played a part, but I would say my college professor was amazing. He ended up being a mentor for me. And I think sometimes teachers do make that difference, right? Well, they always do, but he just made me fall in love with chemistry.
That's awesome. So what did you do as a chemical engineer?
So I did a number of things. When I got to graduate school, so I did an undergraduate degree, 4 years in chemistry. Mm-hmm. Then I went to do a master's degree, and then I invented a reactor to make small particles for my master's degree.
Wow.
It was a particle making reactor. These types of particles are used as catalysts. So when you have a reaction, you need a base So all the chemicals can attach to it and do their reactions, and then they come off. So we were making the particles that go into these reactors. And
Holy
then for
cow!
yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah, well, and the cool thing about science too is that I have no idea what happened after it, but it was a base of knowledge that others could pick up from and build on, and then eventually it could probably go into something that can become commercialized and used in actual industry. But for my PhD, I switched. I had to switch advisors, and then I started studying the protein of rabbit muscle.
Oh.
And actually, this protein is in everybody's body. It's called actin. It's a muscle protein called actin. But we weren't really studying the biology of the protein. We were studying something called polymerization.
Okay.
Which is the way things like plastics are made, right? You start with one particle, and then they connect and make long strings, like DNA. That's a type of macropolymer.
Right.
Or proteins. So proteins are these polymers, biopolymers. So I studied that process. And again, it was very theoretical, but we came up with, I would say, some understanding of how biopolymers work. And I left that, went to do a postdoc. I left that and I went to something else. And this explains why I'm no longer in chemical engineering, but I'm actually in science communication now. I couldn't settle on one project.
Okay.
So my postdoc project, a postdoc is what you do after you get your PhD. It was in making and understanding membranes for filtration of water. Now, I think most people can understand that.
Yeah, exactly.
So when you have wastewater is usually purified and recycled. And so you need membranes for that process. And I was studying something called nanofiltration membranes. These are membranes with pores, holes, right? So small, you can't see it with your eyes, but they're there. And if you put a little bit of pressure, you can get water through, and the things that are bigger than water will stay behind. We were studying new types of membranes and ways to make the membrane such that things won't stick on it, and then you have to change the membrane all the time. Like you see the film you get on your teeth if you don't brush your teeth. That happens to membranes too. It develops a film, and then it becomes no longer as effective. So we were trying to figure out ways to make the membrane not be like that.
So that's almost material science too, right?
Exactly. More material science. Exactly.
Wow.
Okay.
You've done a lot.
I've done quite a bit.
I was just going to say, listeners, if you are those listeners and kids who love all different kinds of things and don't know how you're going to pick one, I think we have a new hero here in Dr. Jermey, because he just got us through his postdoc, but we haven't made the leap to where you are now.
Exactly.
Which is completely different than water filtration membranes. Where are you now?
Exactly. First, I want to clarify that I am not an official editor with the MIT Kids Press. I'm a consultant, but I'm going to explain everything right now. I'm going to give you a quick jump. So after the postdoc, I became a science writer for Physics Today magazine, and I interviewed people like Gordon Moore. He was the co-founder of Intel, and just amazing people in science, Nobel Prize winners. It was fun. And then eventually I ended up where I am now at MIT. I'm the senior editor for physical sciences, which is physics and chemistry and astronomy, engineering and math. And what I do is I try to find people in academia and science writers to write books.
How do engineers think?
How do engineers think? I think that I'm really going to like this episode, aren't I, Jeff? Who is our guest?
This is going to be fun. Today we have Dr. Cory Hixon. He is an assistant professor of engineering at Colorado Christian University.
Welcome to the show, Dr. Cory.
Thank you both for having me.
I get very excited when we have engineers on the show because it's a different way of thinking and looking at things, you know? So we're just going to dive right in. Tell us what kind of engineer you are and kind of like where did you start? Did you always want to be an engineer?
So I can't say I always wanted to be an engineer, but what I can say is that I definitely always wanted to fix things and tinker with things and play with things and adjust things. So a little tiny story, we got our first computer, right? So this is in, I would say 90s, like in the 1990s. And I said to my mom, I was like, I'm going to take this apart. And my mom looked at me with these gigantic eyes and she said, you're going to do what? Right? And I said,
they were expensive back then.
Yes. So I took the whole computer apart and I figured out how to put it back together and everything went kind of fine. There were like some, rattles and clicks and things there, but everything still worked. And now I still am the support person as far as that goes. But so what kind of engineer? So I'm actually an engineering educator. So it's a little bit different because my focus and my emphasis is on teaching students like yourselves, right? Like the listeners to the show, how to become an engineer and what it means to become an engineer and what it's like when you go out into the workforce.
Yes, that is super cool. I love that your PhD is that. Just before we clicked record, you were telling us about what your master's work and your undergraduate work was in. Do you mind sharing that with our audience?
Of course. So for the folks listening, right, if you want to, teach at a university, it takes a lot of schooling to teach at a university. Yes. So if you're interested in doing that and you're interested to teach at a college or a university level, you start off with a bachelor's degree. So my bachelor's is in engineering science from Penn State. So engineering science, if you smush together mechanical, electrical, and then material science engineering, and you kind of push them all together, you get that degree. So it's not as deep in any of them. So it's a little bit lighter there, but at the same time, you get a good broad perspective. I got into my master's degree in industrial and systems engineering because basically in my mind, and ever since I was a little kid, I wouldn't have said it this way before that, but ever since I was a little kid, there are inputs, there are processes, and there are outputs. And that's the way my brain always worked into things is things come into the system. Yep. I process them and then hopefully they go out better than they came in. And then while I was getting my master's degree, I went back for the PhD and I got my master's degree while I was doing that. So I said, well, I'm really passionate about teaching. So I want to learn how do we teach engineers in a better way and in a different way. So my PhD is actually in engineering education.
I see the world as a system too, which is, I guess, maybe unique. I don't know. I graduated from the Naval Academy. So everybody there gets 3 years of engineering. So throw that on top of my 4-year degree in chemistry. So I'm practically a chemical engineer. Yes. I mean, I don't know how that happened. But you learn so much about systems. And what I love is your question is, how do engineers think? So can you break down a little bit about how do they think and how do they approach things?
Absolutely. So one of the big things I want to get across to the listeners and get across to the folks who are thinking about going in engineering is engineering doesn't necessarily mean that you sit down and you design the case of an iPhone, or you sit down and you design this widget or this hammer or this thing. That is a type of engineering. That is actually a very specific type of engineering. So engineering is a combination of a couple different things, right? So it's a combination of what we would call engineering design, right? So thinking in terms of design and particularly engineering design, not design in general, but engineering design. And then there's systems engineering or systems thinking, right? So you would do systems type work. And then there is creating value, right? Because we as engineers typically think if we're not creating value out of what we're doing, or there's not some utility out of what we're doing, then really should we be doing it? That's kind of the way we're ingrained to teach. So it's combining those three things: design, systems, and then the third one is creating value. So that's the way in general, I think an engineer thinks. Now I can go into any one of those if you'd like me to.
Before you do, that is how a grown-up engineer, somebody that's become an engineer, thinks, based on the fact that you started by telling us that you were one of those tinkerers. You took things apart, put them back together. Could you share with our listeners, especially the kids that are listening, could you expand on the tinkering thing of, hey, you may grow up to be an engineer if you ... blank right now as a kid?
Absolutely. So the common and I would say wrong answer to this is I'm good at math and science, right? Like, so typically you get, and this will happen in your high school setting. Somebody will tell you, you're good at math and science, you should be an engineer. And I would say, while that is not bad advice, that is not necessarily the best advice. There are a lot of things you can do by being good at math and science. So what I'm going to say is, if you are the kind of person who likes to solve really hard problems, if you are the kind of person who likes to figure out ways to add additional value into the world, if you're the kind of person who likes to take on the challenge when somebody says, oh, this thing can't be fixed, there's no way we can do this better, right? And you go, oh no, there has to be a way that we can do this better. You need to think about becoming an engineer, right? Because that is what it takes to be an engineer. The math and science and the core fundamental principles are what we engineers build on to do the things I'm talking about: improve, design, add value.
Oh, I think that's excellent. I love that explanation, because, and then the other part of this, to expand upon this, is you can take that engineering thought, way of thinking and apply it to anything, not just engineering, right?
What's interesting is a lot of engineers only work as an engineer for a short amount of time before they are moved into another role because of the process that we use to think. And because of the way we think, there are a lot of companies and there are a lot of situations where they want people who have an engineering degree, right? So they want people who have an engineering way of thinking. So this could be, engineers will go to law school, engineers will go to med school, engineers will become business leaders in their company. And it's because of this ingrained nature. So yes, you may be an engineer and you may work for an engineer as an engineer for the rest of your life. Or you may decide, this was good, I learned a lot through this thinking process, and I'm going to apply it in these ways.
Right.
How do you study another planet's moon?
Oh, I see. How do you study another planet's moon? I can guess you are not at all excited about this, Jeff. Who is our guest today?
Not at all excited to talk to super fantastic flight systems engineer for NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, Miss Tracy Drain.
Welcome to the show, Tracy.
Thank you so much for having me. I can already tell we're going to have a great time today.
We are. We're going to have so much fun because we're talking about moons. And I know Jeff is like jumping up and down. You can't see it, people, but he's jumping up and down already.
I can see it.
Okay, so let's just dive right in. So I always like to start. Did you always want to do this, to study moons on other planets since you were a kid? Were you always looking into the sky?
I was always interested in a whole bunch of things, but space was a big one of them. I was indeed always looking into the sky, watching science fiction shows with my mom. And when I decided to go to school, I wanted to study something that would allow me to work for a company like NASA someday.
Yes.
Well, nicely done. So in between all of the things and space being one of them, was there somewhere along the way, middle school, high school, college, that sort of leaned you towards, okay, space is going to be the thing?
It was pretty much in high school. You know how all the adults ask you that seriously annoying question,
boy.
What do you want to be?
Absolutely, yes.
And when
Listeners,
I was younger,
get ready,
I was
it's
kind of
coming.
like a pilot, a lawyer, an archaeologist. Like I was kind of all over the map. But then in high school, around junior year, it started to get a little more specific. So what are you going to study in school? And I kind of wanted to study astronomy, but I'm old enough that there was no internet back then. And I didn't have a good idea of what astronomers did, right? Like,
ditto, right? Yeah. Yes.
Totally my story.
Yes.
And
yes.
So I knew that engineers like built things, did things. It was easier for me to imagine someone would pay me for doing that. And if we ever came up
which
with
is important, yes.
It is. I kind of need to eat. And if we were ever going to have like the Starship Enterprise, I could be like Geordi's assistant, fixing stuff. And so that's why I decided to study engineering.
I love it.
Yes, that's awesome. Because I think all of us on here can say we're Trekkies and we all grew up with that, and all of these different things. So tell us about engineering. How did you like learning about engineering? Because, even now, unfortunately, there's still not a lot of women in that career, but it's a really cool thing to study. So what did you think about mechanical engineering?
It is a cool thing to study. I picked mechanical because I really liked the idea of general problem solving to make machines that would do stuff, right? It's not really about, I've always been good friends with math. Me and math are tight. I've always really liked physics, But the theoretical side of things was interesting, but wasn't exciting to me, the way that taking that knowledge and turning it into something you can touch with your hands and make things do stuff in the real world.
That's
so
awesome.
For me, being in classes, you're right, there weren't that many women. I think there were like 5 girls in my mechanical engineering classes, and 3 of us became like the 3 musketeers running around doing all sorts of stuff together.
That's awesome.
And it was really just about diving in there and having fun with it was almost like mystery puzzles that we got in classes. How does this work? How does that work? Design of this thing, design of that thing. And I just really enjoyed that a lot.
Oh, yeah.
I really think your answer is going to resonate with a whole lot of listeners. I have an 11-year-old daughter who has flopped back and forth between what do you want to be when you grow up, either a NASA astronaut or a NASA engineer. And I have been thrilled that she has added that to the list.
Yay.
But the way you were just describing, part of the base reason for Solve It for Kids as a podcast is to give kids and families an idea of what's behind that job title.
Yeah.
People see mechanical engineer or systems engineer, but they don't actually know what they're doing. And Miss Tracy, the way you were just describing, we got a puzzle of we want a machine to do X, to do this thing. And I see my daughter playing outside with her friends. And if she had the tools that grown-ups get to have at the JPL, I could easily imagine them wanting to build something new every time they came up with a new idea. Like, how do you collect pine cones? How do you do this? How do you clean off?
Yes.
How do you clean off the driveway from the mess we just made?
That's great.
Yes.
So what was it I'm trying to figure out how you figured out that mechanical engineering was going to be that.
Oh, wow. That's a good question. How did I do that?
Because I've never heard it explained that way before, in such a way that I think kids are going to be like, bam, that's the job I want.
I don't think I had figured it out when I chose to study mechanical engineering. I think that when I was doing my little mental thought process, okay, I can't be an astronomer because I don't know how people are going to pay me. Engineering was just, you understood this vague blob that engineers did stuff. And when I thought about the different kinds of engineering disciplines, there is aerospace engineering, and you might think, well, why didn't you choose to go do that? And that was mainly because even though I didn't know a lot about the industry, I knew aerospace industry had its ups and downs, and you would be like employed and then laid off and employed and laid off. I'm like, I want to skip that. And then I knew that mechanical engineering was a very foundational kind of basic thing that you needed for all sorts of different machines. So I figured, well, if I can't get a job at NASA, I can probably build cars or airplanes or refrigerators. That seems flexible.
Yeah,
I like
that's cool.
Once I started studying things in school and learning from the instructors what it was all about, that I started to more understand that kind of description that I'd given you before. Yeah.
That's awesome.
That's right, I told you. I dare anybody to listen to clips from those 3 amazing engineers, especially Tracy Drain, who is just so excitable about what she does studying other planets' moons. And not want to listen to these full episodes and learn more about the engineering process and how whatever your favorite thing is touches the engineering world.
Exactly. And I love how Dr. Cory Hixon talks to us all about thinking like an engineer.
Yes.
That's a really cool thing. And then also Dr. Jermey Matthews, where he talks about how scientists can think like engineers too.
Totally.
Right? See, I get so excited of all this. This is amazing. So make sure you go back and listen to the full clips of these, the full episodes. You can find them on our website, solveforkids.com, or anywhere you listen to your podcast. And if you start thinking like an engineer or have a question about all of this, make sure you reach out to us on our social media. We are at KidsSolve at Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
And get excited, listeners. Next week, Jen and Jeff will be back with new episodes to start a whole new session right here on
Solve It for Kids.